from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Dale Blasi will look at various summer annual forage options as cattle feedstuffs, as planting time for those forages is near. He'll talk about the nutrient attributes of several alternatives and how they fit cow-calf and backgrounder feeding programs. Then a guest speaker here at K-State yesterday, out of the University of Nebraska, Joe Luck, talks about his latest work on using crop sensors to achieve greater nitrogen use efficiency in corn production, and on using multi-hybrid planters to address variable production issues in a given field. And further ahead, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven returns with this week's commentary on rural Kansas. All this and more next on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You are tuned to the K-State Radio Network, and this is Agriculture Today. Welcome. Planting summer annual forage crops for cattle feeding. A good prospect for any number of you producers out there, as we rapidly encroach upon that time when those forages should go into the ground, of their own volition or as a substitute for wheat acreage that just hasn't made the grade, and there's a fair amount of that around this year. Dale Blasi has joined us. He's a beef cattle specialist with K-State Research and Extension, and he's well-versed in this area of summer annual forage utilization in cattle nutrition. And these, most assuredly, Dale, are a good fit for producers in many, many circumstances.
That's absolutely right, Eric. The summer annuals are extremely efficient at scavenging nutrients, and with whatever precipitation that we're able to obtain, they do a rather good job of converting that into grazable dry matter and harvested dry matter for our livestock.
We bring you by today to talk about what forage types fit what operations the best. We can look at the cow-calf herd. We can look at the backgrounding program. So where does one start thinking that process through, Dale?
Well, first thing I always encourage producers to do is to take stock of what their supplies may be, what they have on hand. If they were able to salvage any wheat forage and roll it up into bales or what have you, take a count on the bales, have a rough idea on the number of cow days you have in supply, and move forward. Many producers simply do not deal with silage at all. They don't have the equipment. They don't have it in their culture, if you will, in terms of utilizing silage. So that kind of takes it out of consideration. But having something that may have flexibility from a grazing and or being able to roll it up as a dried, harvested feed is certainly something to think about. So take stock of what you have and be realistic about what your needs are and plan accordingly. And again, with some of the precip that we've received the last couple of weeks, certainly the 2/10, 3/10, some areas much more moisture where we're able to catch a rain, more than enough to get a stand started. And again, with some timely rains, I think at the end of the season, some opportunities to roll up some feed.
And we'll talk of the options here to consider in as far as forage selection, but a number of these are fairly dry weather hardy, are they not?
Absolutely. And again, it comes back every year, come November, December, when we start to feed our cows. We start dealing with the consequences of the dry weather with this cane feed type of feed in terms of potential nitrate toxicity. These feeds are very versatile and, again, very efficient in scavenging precipitation and converting any bit of nitrogen they have into the system that's present.
Let's walk through some of the possibilities here. Forage sorghum is highly popular here in Kansas, and it's one of the better alternatives, isn't it?
It is. It's really targeted more for, it's a one-chop situation. If we were to receive rains say in the case of sedan hybrids, the regrowth potential is not much there for forage sorghum. So for those producers that are looking at putting up some ensiled feed, a great opportunity for achieving some respectable energy and also some tonnage.
You bring that up. One's looking for a balance here of tonnage and quality at the same time.
Yeah, and it's also a factor of time of harvest in terms of maturity of the plant. You can go for a higher quality plant, but again, going for silage, we key in on the moisture to make sure we get a good fermentation using good grind, chopping it finely and packing it tightly to make a good quality silage product. But the flexibility in some of the hybrids, such as the sedan hybrids, sorghum-sedan, that lends itself for having dry matter production and also for quality. There's some opportunities there to go in, harvest it for hay, or if you need the grazing acres, there's some opportunities there to carry some pears.
In the case of the straight forage sorghum or the sorghum-sedan hybrid, there is one option available to producers called the brown midrib hybrid, and that's fairly valuable to some producers, isn't it?
It is. There's issues in terms of lodging because what happens with respect to the BMR is the presence of the genes that impact the percent of lignin, which is an indirect quality indicator, if you will, the digestibility of the feed. The presence of the BMR gene, it is touted in terms of providing additional energy availability to the animal, but at the same time, there's a small price to pay in terms of the ability of the plant to withstand high winds, and as that height of the plant gets taller, there's challenges potentially with that, which is why you see a lot of particular dwarf BMRs that are leveraging the quality in the stem, also with the leaf to stem, that being a higher leaf area, providing a greater quality product for the animal.
So it's a judgment call, really, as
Absolutely.
far as the individual producer goes. What about plain old sedan grass?
It's an old standby. It's been around for numerous years. It's a cane feed. It's what a lot of producers refer to, and I think at the end of the day, when your hay piles are mighty short, this could be a savior for a lot of producers in terms of ensuring that we have feed going into a winter we don't know what's going to be about in terms of severity and so forth.
Would you look at sedan grass as more or less a backup option here compared to forage sorghum or the sorghum-sedan hybrids in as far as nutrient content and the like?
I think it's a function of planting density in terms of how fine a stem you want to get. And I think it provides producers, providing you let that plant get to, say, 14 or 15 inches in height, you've got some great grazing opportunities there to stretch out what you have. If your native grass starts to fall short come the second, third, fourth week in July, you've got something to carry those cows with. By the same token, you've got great opportunities for putting up some quality feed as well, as long as you tune into the stage of maturity and going for the height of the cut and going for something that, say, is in that 7% or so protein range. You make a good, respectable, dried, harvested forage that you could use at a later time. Plus, you get the regrowth, too. That's the real key with the sedan is with adequate moisture, timely moisture, you'll get some regrowth come the fall time of the year, and that's a great opportunity for some wean calves situations where you wean calves, you got something to go to.
Talk with us a bit about the millets. Those have come on in interest in, recent years, although they've been around a long while. Hybrid pearl millet, foxtail millet, those can be a fit for some operations.
Yeah, pearl millet is, the leaf to stem is amazing with the pearl millets. I'm actually a big fan of the pearl millets. You may perhaps not get the tonnage, but I think the leaf to stem area, the ratio, if you will, is incredible with the amount of leaf matter produced for the plant. So the quality is there. The foxtails and stuff we refer to commonly as a catch crop at best. It's something you come in and hopefully in about 45 days or so you got a grazable stand to get in there quickly. Yield-wise, the foxtails really don't produce anywhere close. They're a catch crop at best. Pearl millets, I'm pretty high on that. I think that ranks pretty high up in my board in terms of comparing it even with a straight sedan or even a sedan hybrid for that matter.
One of the pluses in the case of the millets, the potential for prussic acid toxicity is lower than the other options.
Absolutely. Anytime there's a presence of the sorghum gene, you're going to have the potential for prussic acid that will rear its ugly head should you graze the plant too short, where the active growing plant, again, as I alluded to earlier, you got to wait for a minimum of 12 inches. I feel more comfortable waiting for 14, 15 inches. But in the fall of the year, when we're dealing with the changing environment and the potential for the frost and everything, we have that issue. And if you're putting any sorghum up for like a green chop or anything, that runs a high risk of creating some issues on the animals. And cyanide, that being the prussic acid, is very, very unforgiving. It is not like you would see in a subacute situation with nitrate, where you may see symptoms for a period of time. The sudden effects, the acute nature of the cyanide is rather quick and unforgiving at best.
You really have to think about that potential as you make a decision on the forage that you will plant. But in the main, we've several alternatives here in Kansas that will work quite well, and we've a decent planting window from now until, well, early July in some cases to get these crops in, Dale.
That's right. You start thinking about the last frost-free date, and portions of Kansas, we're looking at the first or so week of October, but still an opportunity to grow some feed. And again, we need to take advantage of any precipitation that comes our way, and these plant types are certainly a wonderful avenue for scavenging and producing a grazable or harvestable dry matter product for our beef cows and or growing calves as well.
So if you're a cow-calf producer, a backgrounder looking to bolster your forage supplies going into the fall and winter, these are great alternatives, these summer annual forages. Check the K-State Research and Extension webpage. There's information on selection and production characteristics of each of these. That's at ksre.ksu.edu. Dale, thanks for the input.
Thank you, Eric.
Dale Blasi is a beef cattle specialist, K-State Research and Extension. You're tuned to Agriculture Today, and we'll have more in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Well, yesterday here on the K-State campus, several leading experts in precision agriculture practices gathered for a special conference sharing notes on their research as part of the NCERA, and we'll find out what that's all about in just a moment. But we're talking with one of the presenters. He's a precision agricultural engineer from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Joe Luck. And Joe, we'd like to have you share a few of the things that you passed along to your fellow researchers at this conference in just a second. But what is NCERA?
Yeah, it's actually the North Central region for education and research. So it's one way that the USDA is kind of set up to organize universities into subgroups in areas like the North Central, Southeast, so forth, to get together and share what they're doing and try and promote collaboration, through education, like teaching or extension and research efforts.
Kansas is part of this, but just to give people a geographical context, from Kansas north to the Canadian border, as far east as Ohio and north, right?
Yeah, Nebraska is usually one of the western edge, Ohio on the east, North Dakota State Universities represented usually, and then all the way down here to Kansas.
Right to the meat and potatoes of what you were brought here for, to share some of the ventures that you've been involved with as far as precision agricultural research at UNL. And a great lot of this is, in fact, in-field research out across the state, right?
Yeah, we try hard to, do a lot of our research with cooperating producers, using technology and equipment similar to what they're using in the field. And, the more acres you can get this stuff run over, the better information you're going to have to kind of look at in the long run. So, yeah, we think that's pretty important, and we really have tried to integrate that in a lot of our research projects.
Joe, you highlighted three things. We'd like to touch upon all of those briefly, if we might. The first was something called Project Sense. Now, Sense is an acronym. You can outline that if you see fit. But this, in effect, looked at nitrogen use efficiency in corn production.
Yeah, that's right. Project Sense, and the overall goal is to try and improve nitrogen use efficiency. And what we're trying to do with that is demonstrate the use of crop canopy sensors on application equipment. So these are active sensors. What we're trying to do is compare that to what the growers are doing with their nitrogen management. This is a reactive approach. It's in season. So, we're putting on nitrogen around B12 or so. Over the past 3 years, we've done about an average of 18 field sites per year with our cooperating producers, where in the field we'll have small test strips testing the growers' approach to nitrogen management versus what the sensors would predict in terms of nitrogen need.
Presumably, as a sidebar, producers' approaches to N management, and this is in irrigated corn now, probably vary fairly widely, or do they?
That's correct. Well, in a lot of the areas we worked in were Phase 2 and Phase 3 groundwater management areas. So a lot of those growers, in result of the natural resource districts, they have, certain ways they have to put on nitrogen inhibitors, has to be in season. So there were some slight differences in some of the growers, but a lot of them were kind of doing the same thing, a base rate at or around planting followed up with an in-season application.
So when you compared those varying methods on the grower's part to what the sensor technology can provide in the way of guidance on N applications, how did the sensor approach pan out?
Yeah, so a 3-year average in terms of reducing the amount of nitrogen used, that happened all 3 years with the sensors. There's also typically a yield penalty with that approach, and so across 3 years we averaged about 4 bushels per acre loss compared to what the grower was doing. We also used about 30 pounds less nitrogen on average than what the grower was doing. So on the average across all 3 years, all about 54 sites, the sensors were able to cut nitrogen applied. We did lose a little bit of yield, but on average, that's still it was a positive economic return given typical nitrogen and corn prices.
So is that a convincing argument to go with sensors by and large, or are there any kind of hang-ups involved here?
Well, there's certainly hang-ups. For that type of system, you have to have a high-clearance applicator that's available to put the nitrogen on. Not everybody has that, and that's a huge investment. You can get the sensors up and going for about $15,000 a year if you have that type of equipment. So from that standpoint, we're probably not convinced a lot of people that that's the best approach. We have a lot of people interested in looking at fertigation with UAVs, though. However, a lot of the growers we've worked with did talk about that they had reduced nitrogen in their own management system as a result of working with the project, because they see that there's an ability to push nitrogen use efficiency and still get a decent corn crop, economically positive. So we've had a lot of growers, I think almost 40 or 50% mentioned that they had cut nitrogen rates based on working with us, and that's a positive outcome.
Joe, the second thing you spoke of during your presentation at this conference, you've been looking at the attributes of these multi-hybrid planter units, which has been an interesting advance into itself in recent years as a possibility. This was in corn and soybean production, but what aspect were you concentrating on here?
Yeah, in the corn production, we were primarily looking at placement of offensive and defensive hybrids. So, looking at areas of a field that might have been stressed historically. We had yield data and soil textural data and information like that to look at. And then with the soybeans, we were looking at sudden death syndrome, trying to treat that with Elevo, which is a product available from Bayer, and kind of the same thing using historical information, yield data, imagery, grower information to try and target those areas and test that out. And so the multi-hybrid planter allowed us to basically on the go change whichever one of those two treatments we wanted to place in the field.
That sounds like a straightforward and positive approach to dealing with SDS, for instance, on a spot basis wherein that disease tends to vary within the field. So does that technology bear results that are helpful?
Yeah, we, in the corn studies, we actually had across the whole area we worked with probably about 400 or 500 acres the first year. had really good rainfall. So actually, across both years, there was not a huge difference between the defensive and offensive corn hybrids. However, that there could be a risk analysis potential there. It didn't penalize us using the defensive hybrid. So if there had been drought conditions, what might have been the positive economic benefit? So a lot of that's unknown yet. The nice thing with the SDS is typically a more persistent problem, so it's going to hit the same area of the field. Obviously, those are the easier solutions if we can, have a technology application or a management application. 3 out of our 4 field sites, there wasn't a statistical difference in marginal net return. We kind of always look at that. What was the yield benefit, the price for corn, what was the cost of the treatment, and the cost of that product and the rate. 1 out of the 4 did show a pretty significant economic advantage, an 80-acre field that had the producer put those treated seeds in the right location and not locations that didn't need it, probably would have made about $4,000 off of 1 field. So again, that's how do you extrapolate that information out to see, what would have been the whole farm potential if there were other areas that had SDS. So more favorable results there, in other words, gave us something interesting. But again, it's all about persistence of the problem and severity.
So as you step back and look at this particular work and think about multi-hybrid planters and their utility and the returns to those in the field, this is still an evolving technology, in effect?
Well, the technology is sound. It's all about the decision. I think that's where a lot of the issues we deal with today, all across agriculture, we've got amazing technologies. They do individual row control, all these different things agronomically, and then year to year, that temporal variation. Those are some of the biggest things we struggle with, and again, it just takes continuing to do research, and most of the people recognize that you're not going to prove a technology in 1 year. It's going to have to be tested year in, year out.
Joe, the last thing you spoke of, just very briefly here, well, it's about data collection, data sharing, something called the Agricultural Data Coalition. What's that about?
Yeah, the Ag Data Coalition, it's an online platform, basically industry, university, grower organization, kind of a cooperative that came together to develop a platform that really had the farmer's interest in mind when it came to data storage. The Agricultural Data Coalition today exists as a nonprofit. There's a web-based platform that exists that if I sign up for an account, I can pull my data files in there directly from, say, my John Deere, Raven Slingshot, Climate Core, for instance. And it's stored in that account as a data backup that, that I have control over that data. In other words, there's no question who the owner of that data is and who has permissions. So that's one aspect that's pretty unique. The other one is the ability to network with others, and that's kind of where the future vision and hope for that is. Once the data is in that online account, there's no need to upload, download. It's simple virtual transfer. So the hope is in the not-too-distant future to have the Ag Data Cooperative set up where, there's more of a for-profit ability to network with people that are in that business. And so there's a lot of good information out on the web at agriculturedatacoalition.org. There should be some good information there for people that are interested.
It's a cutting-edge field, is the broad umbrella of precision agriculture, and no lack of new things coming along, right, Joe?
No, a lot of people are calling it, 2.0 is decision agriculture, and it's, we've got some great plug-and-play technologies, but a lot of these applications still require knowledge, somehow to apply those technologies, and so that's kind of where the fun is right now, is figuring out how to bring all this information to bear to make those, it comes back to actionable items, for the grower, how to make those and with the best information that we have.
Thanks for sharing a few moments with us from your presentation here, and safe travels back to Lincoln.
Thank you very much.
He's a precision agricultural engineer at the University of Nebraska, Joe Luck, and he was one of those presenting at the North Central Education and Research Association Conference on Precision Agriculture, which took place here on the K-State campus this week. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines in brief for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the recent agreement between the U.S. and China addressing various trade issues could result in more Chinese purchases of our nation's farm and food products, according to one top USDA official. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
A framework. That is how Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross describes a path forward for the U.S. and China to address various trade issues. That announcement Monday includes follow-up, as explained by USDA's Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs, Ted McKinney.
We're hearing that Secretary Ross will lead a delegation back to Beijing next week, and among other things, ag will be one of the focal points.
The Trump administration over the weekend announced the potential framework centered on China purchasing more U.S. products, including those in the farm and energy sectors, and in turn reducing the U.S. trade deficit with China. Undersecretary McKinney clarified,
these are largely not government-to-government transactions. We can help set structure and help set expectations, and we're very happy and fully engaged to do that. But market-based demand is going to be a big factor. And based on what we heard, I'm very excited about that potential.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, the chief agriculture negotiator with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, Greg Dowd, discussed China at a Farm Foundation forum yesterday. This just as producers are seeing price rallies now that the U.S. and China appear to be putting tariffs on hold, which could boost U.S. farm exports. Dowd urged the audience to read the Trade Representative report on the Section 301 investigation into China's acts, policies, and practices related to technology transfer, intellectual property, and innovation. He referred to China's insistence that U.S. companies doing business there provide access to the technology behind their products. He also pointed out that these practices have taken place outside of the realm of the World Trade Organization and said, quoting here, "This is the issue we have in front of us." The trade representative believes that since China joined the WTO back in 2001, it has exceeded what it believed would be its right to agricultural subsidization by somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 billion, according to Dowd. And the result of that, he notes, is that China now has 38% of the world's residual corn supply, 52% of the wheat, 67% of the rice, 22% of the soybeans, and 40% of the cotton. The purpose of the discussion, says Dowd, is to make China realize they need to take farm policy there in a different direction, as he put it. Now, Darcy Vetter, who was the chief agriculture negotiator under the Obama administration, said at that forum yesterday she questions the future of the underlying trade system because of attacks on the rules at the WTO and the expectations that the U.S. will remain a leader on trade policy. She says the WTO has growing pains, she put it, in the relationship between the developed and developing countries and needs more transparency and enforcement, but saying that it has served the U.S. well in many ways. On the North American Free Trade Agreement, Dowd said it's important to get that policy right rather than to rush it. Now, to follow up on that, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says that the president does not have a firm deadline on ending the NAFTA renegotiations. He says that the president is more concerned about getting a good deal. Mnuchin says whether we pass it in this Congress or we pass it in the new Congress, in his words, the president is determined that we renegotiate NAFTA. But Mnuchin indicates that President Trump could still follow through on those threats to withdraw from the pact or to take other action. Meantime, NAFTA 2.0 talks should proceed as needed to get those negotiations right. Those are the words of Senate Finance Committee Chairman Orrin Hatch this week in remarks on the Senate floor. He says that the most important factor for determining when Congress will vote on an eventual agreement is the quality of the deal. And meantime, a group of senators also warned U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer against using a potential threat to withdraw from NAFTA to force Congress to support the trade deal. And the House will have another chance to vote on the Farm Bill on June the 22nd. according to House Agriculture Committee Chairman Mike Conaway. He said the Freedom Caucus will get the immigration vote that it demanded before the House takes up the Farm Bill again. The bloc of conservative Republicans helped sink the bill last week as all Democrats, as well as 30 Republicans, voted against the package. Conaway says he does not plan to alter the Farm Bill, adding it was defeated because of the immigration vote issue between House leaders and the conservatives. The Freedom Caucus has demanded a floor vote on a conservative immigration bill by Representative Bob Goodlatte. The issue Friday was the immigration bill and not the Farm Bill, said Conaway. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise said the plan is to vote on the Goodlatte immigration bill sometime before the June 22nd second vote on the Farm Bill. Well, when hay and forage production is low due to drought, hay prices often escalate, and in severe cases, forage of any kind may be hard to obtain. Limit feeding can be a cost-effective strategy to retain the cow herd nucleus during these periods. And Great Plains Grazing will be putting on a special webinar on that very topic. Researcher David Lallman of Oklahoma State University will be hosting this free webinar entitled Limit Feeding During Drought. That's taking place this Friday, May the 25th, at 10 o'clock in the morning Central Time. This is open to anyone interested in gaining a better understanding of limit feeding options to maintain cows when forage is limited. Webinar participants can expect to learn about the potential benefits and limitations of limit feeding and how to compare feed energy sources as well as how to determine feed rations. Now, Great Plains Grazing, to remind, is a USDA-sponsored coordinated agricultural project. K-State is part of that initiative. If you'd like to take in this special webinar on limit feeding during drought, go to this website to find out more information, www.greatplainsgrazing.org. That's greatplainsgrazing.org. It's taking place once more this coming Friday at 10:30. And David Lallman of Oklahoma State University will be hosting it. Ought to be an outstanding opportunity for you producers to check into. Lastly, ahead of the break, to remind you once more, if you'd like to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, go to agtoday.net, or you can use your podcast app on your mobile device and search for Agriculture Today Kansas. You'll find the program, tap the subscribe button there, and episodes of the broadcast will automatically arrive on your device every weekday. We'll be back with more after these moments away. You are tuned to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
I planted a couple hundred walnuts on a small, odd corner field, which was difficult to get at when it had rained.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
We're halfway into May, and as I look around, I've seen quite a few newly planted trees in yards and on campus. It's a good thing. We need to keep on planting trees. I'm talking ornamental trees, landscape trees. I'm not talking forestry trees. That is a whole different chapter. And forestry trees are much smaller, easier to handle. Many years ago, I ordered 2,000 selected trees for the farm. It was quite a job to plant them by myself. My wife came out later and helped me, but the majority I planted. It's quite a job. You can plant them by machine, and that is the smart way. I did it by hand, and with the tractor with the small post hole digger attached. I would dig, 50 holes and then carefully plant 50 trees. I say carefully because to plant right, you have to do it right. I've not lost many of the trees I planted along the creek and other places. I planted a couple hundred walnuts on a small odd corner field, which was difficult to get at when it had rained. The small field has deep, dark soil, excellent for growing straight walnuts. A few of the young trees were damaged by the bugs during early fall, when they want and need to rub the velvet from their new set of antlers. That's the way it goes. Now, if that happens on newly planted ornamental trees, that is a totally different story. Last spring, I brought along a young seedling tree when visiting Martin, my son, in Texas. They had bought their property to be developed into an equestrian center. My thought was that a nice, straight, good-looking seedling grown from a now large London plane tree near the garage here on the hill at home would be a nice present. I'd wrapped the homegrown tree carefully and fitted it inside the car for the 13-hour trip south. With it traveled a few smaller trees. All were grown in containers, and all were homegrown. At my son's place, I discussed with them where to plant the trees. But the big one I wanted to plant near the entrance gate, and that is what I did. When planting, I dug a good-sized hole and crumbled the soil, rather heavy soil, as water flows there when there is a good rain. The London plane tree can take that. It is related to the sycamore. I made sure that I did not plant too deep. Too many trees are planted deeper than they should. Look carefully at the trunk and study the depth it shows in the container or in the burlap bag if it is a balled and burlap tree, so-called B&B. And always remember that gravity will pull the tree down deeper into the hole you dug if it is a big hole. I'd rather have a wider hole than a deeper hole. So, if you feel like digging, dig a wider hole. Make sure that the sides of the hole are crumbly rough, not glazed smooth. The rough sides make it easier for the newly growing roots to get well established. Glazed sides make it more difficult. That's especially the case if you dig the holes a day or two earlier. The soil dries out. That's not what you want, or what the tree needs. I know I did a good job planting the tree near the property gate. And the remaining days that fall, I could just see the tree grow and grow. In my mind, I even saw it big, long after I am gone. I carefully had staked it and placed protected wire around it to keep the trespassing deer away from it. However, it seems that a bug did have a notion to rub on that small tree, or maybe he was just mad that tree and others he would like to rub on all had protective wire around them. One morning, when Martin drove out, he noticed the tree gone, and so was the protective wire cage. The cage he found later way off, as well as the snapped-off tree. Talk about being upset. However, that's the way it was when I visited again last fall. I knew what to do and decided, even though it was fall, to cut the broken tree back close to the ground and hope and expect that a new shoot would come in spring to replace the lost tree. I cut the stump carefully to a bud and replaced and staked a wire fence around it. With all that taken care of, there was nothing else to do than wait until spring. Feel my joy when my son sent me a photo of the strong shoot with leaves coming up from the bud near the base. We do have a new tree, and with well-established roots, that sprout should grow and grow. I hope that those who have planted trees this spring will be rewarded. There are many choices of good trees. Knowing that a tree is adapted to the region and site is important. Asking yourself the function of the tree, whether it is shade from summer sun or from wind. Being an ornamental tree, it may have spring blossoms or colored leaves in the fall. It may have interesting bark, like the London plane I planted. I hope that your tree, or trees for that matter, give back on your investment. Just remember, besides enjoying a well-placed tree, the value of your property will increase. And if you ever sell and drive off, maybe you'll glance back once more in the rearview mirror to look at that small tree you planted years ago. Now, a big, strong specimen. Some trees become family.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. That is our time for today, and thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.